Welcome to another impactful episode of the PSTA podcast. As you can already figure out, I have the most famous guest we have ever had on the PSTA podcast. Your friend, the one and only Patrick Kelly.
Craig, I'm a little worried that I'm the most famous guest that's been on this podcast. We've got to up the guest list a little bit.
Well, you should feel better because I probably say that to everybody that's on the podcast. So
okay, well, that makes me feel better.
You're the most famous person right now.
That's great. I am the most famous guest on this episode.
So, yes, we are getting a jump on advocacy over here at PSTA. We're so excited about the release of the 2024 R.E.A.C.H legislative agenda. Yes, R.E.A.C.H does stand for something. I'll let Patrick get into that. But before we get started, Patrick, let's give a big shout out to Molly Sharp, our director of marketing.
Huge shout out. The best.
Yeah, she did an amazing job with the layout of this legislative agenda. And Patrick, you know, the content in here is so rich, so comprehensive. I think not only our legislators who we'll send this to, obviously, but our teachers will be able to see a reflection of what they wanted in our legislative agenda. And I'll let you get into that. But I think it's not just what we want as a staff. You know, we take the time to hear from our teachers. So just kind of talk about that process before we get into the nuts and bolts of the agenda.
Yeah, the reason that this agenda is so rich and comprehensive is because it's reflective of the voice of South Carolina educators. The PSTA annual legislative agenda it doesn't start with staff priorities. What it starts with is a survey of all PSTA membership, and as the largest association of educators in South Carolina, it's a lot of members and a lot of voices. And so we survey them in August, get their feedback and their priorities. And some of the most, what I think, impactful parts of the legislative agenda the last 4 years have come directly from members. PSTA being the first education association in South Carolina to prioritize paid parental leave a few years ago. That was direct feedback from a PSTA member in a classroom in the state of South Carolina via that member survey. And we saw that, and we thought that was a fantastic idea, and we included it. And here we are sitting 3 or 4 years later, and South Carolina is one of only a handful of states in the nation to have a paid parental leave policy for educators. So we start with the voice of educators. We then pull what they have given us to develop a draft to be reviewed by the elected PSTA board of directors, which are all current educators in South Carolina. The board refines and revises that draft. We then send the draft out to members that completed the survey who indicated that they'd be willing to give us additional feedback. They give us even more feedback. We go through draft 3.0 at that point. We do a final edit, and then this thing is ready to go, and we're excited to get it out in ample time to be reviewed in advance of the 2024 policy season.
Well, thanks for that. Thanks for that overview, Patrick. So jump right into it. What can we expect to see in this legislative agenda? Top priorities for 2024, anything that you want to share with our members?
Yeah, so the 2024 agenda builds on the 2023, and the reason why is because South Carolina's General Assembly runs on 2-year terms. And so legislation that did not make it to the finish line in 2023 is still in play for 2024, and so we didn't want to start completely new because there's unfinished business. So we continue to use the R.E.A.C.H acronym for this agenda, and as you indicated, R.E.A.C stands for something. It is focused on 5 things. The letter R is for recruiting and retaining world-class talent. Letter E is for equality of opportunity for students. A is for assessment and accountability. C is for comprehensive student supports. And H is the 5th one, high-quality curriculum and instruction. And we think policies in those 5 areas are what are necessary to ensure that every student in South Carolina gets the education that they need and deserve in 2024 and beyond.
So what would be the top priorities for this legislative session?
Yeah, so the legislative agenda is comprehensive because it reflects the views of South Carolina educators. And while we would love to see everything in this agenda cross the finish line in 2024, and we believe that it would benefit students and educators if it did cross the finish line, we're also realists, and we understand how the legislative process works and that things take time. So we've taken the liberty in this agenda to highlight 4 policies that we see as critically important as top priorities. Number 1 is dealing with educator compensation. We laid down a marker several years ago that PSTA wanted to see educator salaries reach a minimum of $50,000 in South Carolina. We are grateful that Governor McMaster has partnered in that effort, in the sense that he has also made it a priority for himself. But that work's not done. Minimum pay right now in South Carolina is $42,500. That means we've still got some ways to go. And in this current inflation environment, as well as this current job market, where there's a lot of opportunities for employment for individuals with teacher qualifications, even outside the education sector, we have got to address educator compensation. Number 2 priority is school safety. We have heard loud and clear from our members that more work is needed to ensure that our schools are safe for students to learn and for educators to work. The General Assembly passed some significant things in this area in 2023, a new statewide school safety center, $20 million in the budget for school safety, but more work is needed. All you got to do is flip on the news to see another story about a gun at school, a significant fight at school.
Yeah.
Students aren't going to be able to learn if schools aren't safe and secure environments. And so we've got to continue to work on that. And we'll continue to work with our partner associations in the South Carolina Coalition for Safer Schools to make that happen. The third and fourth priorities are actually individual pieces of legislation that made it part of the way through the legislative process, but not to the finish line. The first one is H 4280, which is the Educator Assistance Act. It passed the House of Representatives unanimously and is sitting in the Senate. This bill, which was sponsored by Education Committee Chair Shannon Erickson, does a lot to improve educator working conditions in South Carolina by providing a permanent professional certificate, by reducing the potential penalty that a teacher would face for breach of contract in an instance where, say, they need to leave employment to care for a ill family member in another state, or their spouse gets deployed. And thirdly, it gives teachers greater autonomy over their employment status by giving them the ability to know what they're getting paid before they sign a fully binding contract. And then that fourth priority is another bill. It is S-125, which passed the Senate unanimously and now sits in the House Education Committee. It is the bill that would make education majors in South Carolina eligible for the same enhanced lottery scholarship that has been available for the last 15 years now to math and science majors. The reason for that scholarship enhancement is because those are critical need areas, according to the General Assembly. Well, in the midst of a record educator shortage, so is education. The Senate has passed this bill 3 times in the last 4 years. The House needs to finish the job and get this to the governor's desk.
So going back to 4280, talk about the importance of this bill passing the House so quickly and having the chairwoman of that committee sponsoring that bill.
Yeah, what's interesting about 4280 is Chair Lady Erickson listened to educators closely. It's actually, in some ways, it's a compilation of multiple different legislative concepts that have been floated around the General Assembly the last few years. And it's reflective. I mean, this is one of those instances where the title of the bill actually reflects what the bill's about. The Chair Lady wants to assist educators in South Carolina to ensure that they have the working conditions necessary to retain a great workforce. Now, is it the magic bullet that solves all working condition issues in South Carolina? Not a chance. There's more there, and I don't think any member of the House that voted for the bill would say this is the be-all, end-all. But it takes significant steps, and it's responsive to direct feedback that legislators have heard from educators, which is why we really think this thing needs to make it through the Senate in 2024.
Absolutely, and it also leads into a conversation about Senate Bill 125, because years ago, Patrick, a teacher in Richland School District 2 came to us with this idea about the lottery enhancement for education majors. And so when we say we value educator voices, that is a prime example of an educator in Richland 2 who came to us and said this should be something that we put in place, and we've been fighting for it. And so we're hoping that we get it across the finish line. So, Patrick, I want to spend a little time now talking about how, this is a living, breathing document. We want this to carry us throughout the 2024 session. But let's talk to educators about how they can work alongside this document, as we go to our elected officials on behalf of our teachers, but we also hope that they get involved too. how can they get involved throughout the legislative session? Yes, this document is done. It has the input from them in it, but it just doesn't stop there. Talk about the steps and how they can get involved throughout the legislative session next session.
Sure. Yeah. No, step one is to read the policy agenda. Now, I know. Look, man. I feel it for every teacher that just
great
cringed.
read aloud material for your third grade students.
Well, I mean, as somebody who just got done grading 31 advanced placement government essays over the weekend, I always hesitate to tell a teacher in the middle of the school year, read something, because I know you're reading a lot. But it is critically important to see what's in this so that you can advocate for it effectively. So I would encourage people to take a moment to read through. We've also included lots of infographics to try to make it more accessible. But start with reading. Number two, every PSTA member will be getting an email on October the 9th that includes a link to a form that will allow them to email their representative and their senator in the South Carolina legislature, asking them to support the policies contained in the R.E.A.C.H agenda. We have put a hard copy of this agenda in U.S. mail to all 170 members of the South Carolina General Assembly, so they're going to have access to this, but they need to hear from their constituents the importance of reviewing this document. And so that form that's in the email to members is super straightforward and simple, and that's a starting place to just get the conversation going. The third thing I would encourage members to do is find the items in the agenda that resonate most strongly with your working conditions, with your particular story. There's a lot in this agenda because it represents the views of all educators across South Carolina. I'm a high school government teacher. Things that deal with kindergarten literacy assessments, I care about them, but I don't have a unique story about them because I don't teach kindergartners. So look for the things that resonate with you. I'll give you a simple example. One thing that's new in this year's agenda when we talk about time for teachers in working conditions is we've been advocating for unencumbered time for educators for years, and we will continue to advocate not only for the expansion of that policy, but the actual implementation of that policy for elementary teachers as the law dictates, because we know that's not happening everywhere. But you'll see in this year's agenda, there's a new addition that calls on the legislature to amend state code to ensure that teachers have at least 2 protected days for classroom preparation at the start of a school year. That they're not PD days, they're not days where you have to sit and do training, that they are days to get your classroom ready, to get your syllabi ready, to prepare for your students. That's not currently afforded under state law. We think it should be. And that was a PSTA member who reached out to us with that idea. So I would hope that that member would advocate on that particular issue. So find the 2 or 3 things in the agenda that resonate most strongly with your experience, that would make the biggest difference for you and for your students and their families, and get ready to engage on those topics as we kick into the legislative session in January.
Yeah, I was writing my notes to ask that question, and Patrick, beat me to it. Great minds think alike, right?
Great minds.
And, the legislative session, we want you to be able to engage during that time, but we're coming up into the holiday season, and, you're going to see your elected officials out at different events, festivals, and things like that. And obviously you're there to have a good time. But if you are wanting to engage, being familiar with the legislative agenda, which will be launched in a few days. I'm probably timing and dating it, but it's okay.
It's okay. I think we're going to release this the day the agenda comes out. But regardless.
So it all works out. Take those moments to be able to talk about those 2 to 3 things that Patrick talked about, that that resonates with you, and you'll be more versed to be able to talk about them. And hey, we get it. If a question is asked of you that you're not sure about, you can always say, I will check on that with my representative from PSTA and get back to you. So don't feel that you have to have all the answers, but reading it is a great idea.
Yeah, and don't be intimidated. When we do PD for teachers on how to do advocacy with PSTA, one of the things that we emphasize is that advocacy is about telling your story. I'm now singing the song from the Hamilton musical in my head, and I will spare the listeners from that, although I heard that the people in Alaska love my remix of Hamilton. But all you got to do is tell your story.
Yeah.
If you got too many students in your class, tell about it. If you didn't have enough time to get your classroom ready at the start of the year, tell about it. If you've got student debt that right now is crippling for you and making your salary untenable for your family, tell the story. And not only does your story matter because you're a constituent, it is and a professional educator who has unique expertise that no one else has about your classroom and your students and their families. Next year, 2024, is an election year. All 170 members of the South Carolina General Assembly are going to be on the ballot. Now, I'm not saying that means that they listen more next year than they ordinarily do. They're elected officials. They're always listening to their constituents, but they will be out in their communities a little bit more than normal because they've got to get out to campaign. That's just the nature of the beast. So you'll have opportunities. They will be holding town halls. They will be asking for public input. They will want to meet with likely voters in their district. The door is there. You just have to walk through it in 2024. And when you get through the door, just tell your story and tell your legislator what is necessary. And also your local school board members. Let's not forget those because they're going to be on the ballot in 2024. Just tell the story of what's needed. And once you do that, you can have a conversation that directs them toward the R.E.A.C.H agenda and directs them toward PSTA staff if they need additional research on a topic.
Well, thanks for explaining that even further, Patrick. So, as we wrap up this episode and this launch, anything else you want to share with our members and what they can expect maybe throughout the school year legislative session? What kind of contact can they expect from you? Let's say we may have a new member in Alaska.
Sure.
We might need to let them know, or a new member right here in South Carolina. What can they expect to receive from us at PSTA during the legislative session?
Well, what they can expect is every Friday, the General Assembly comes back into session second week in January and will run till the second week in May. They meet 3 days a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Every Friday, there will be a Legislative Alert Network email that will go out to members, so be on the lookout for that. It's always queued up to come out at 2 p.m. on Friday. If you don't see that on a Friday in January, contact PSTA so that we can make sure we got the right email address for you loaded into the system. Those Friday emails will give you an update on what happened at the General Assembly in the week that finished, a preview of what's likely to happen in the week ahead, and some quick actions you can take to advocate through our advocacy platform that's designed to be as efficient as possible, but also to be as detailed as you want to make it. We want your voice to be reflected, but we also want to be mindful of the fact you have limited time to share that voice in the midst of a school year. So that's coming every Friday. There are also going to be unique opportunities to advocate beyond the quote-unquote normal activities. One thing that members will see in the email on Tuesday that announces the release of the agenda and has that form to contact legislators is an opportunity to sign up to be a PSTA district captain. And so that program is really simple. It is being a point of contact in a legislative district. Our goal is to have at least one captain in all 46 Senate districts in South Carolina. If we can get to all 124 House districts, that'll be phenomenal, but I'm going to be happy if we get 46 Senate, and then we'll build from there. Those are individuals that we ask to kind of be on call for time-urgent tasks. So if that's something, there's not like meetings that you have to attend or something like that. You're just saying, hey, Patrick, contact me if there is a time-sensitive issue, and I will commit to reaching out to my elected officials. If you're willing to take that on, you just got to complete the form and the email that comes out with the launch of the legislative agenda. Those district captains made a difference last year. And so we're looking to build that program out to have some leadership as well as some constant communication at the local level for every member of the General Assembly from PSTA members.
Well, thank you, Patrick, for that overview of the legislative R.E.A.C.H agenda. As always, our favorite guest in the whole wide world, right? Y'all give them some love in the comments. Make sure you share, download, and listen to this podcast. It's been another impactful episode of the PSTA podcast. We'll see you next time. Thanks.